How much is God calling me? How much is God calling you to do? How much is enough? So, I grew up in the church. I went to morning services, night services, Sunday school, Bible study, youth groups, small group, leaders' meetings on a consistent basis. My parents or my grandma made sure I was there. I grew up knowing people in the church, knowing the pastor. I even shared a first name with him, which when I was 7, I thought that was pretty cool. And I commonly referred to him as Big Lindsay, and he was big. He was probably a head taller than I am now, big, bushy, black beard. And when you're 7 years old and you're looking up at that, I'm like, that's pretty cool. And I loved it. I loved church. I loved some of the traditions. I loved the worship. I loved the Bible readings and the teaching. And more importantly, I loved the people. But I was young. I didn't really fully get it. I didn't fully grasp the magnitude of what Christianity was and is all about until my early teen years, when I consciously, for the first time, made a decision to commit my life to follow Jesus. Now, it wasn't long after I did that, in 1999. I think I was 13 at the time, and I was sitting in RE. I'm from New South Wales, that's what we called it there, religious education. I think you might call it SRE here. In New South Wales, we're not special enough to deserve the S. And my RE teacher was Mrs. Barnes. Now, she was a lovely, faithful lady who had a big impact on my faith over the years. And many years later, I ended up in the same church as her as well. Now, she shared, this one particular day, she shared a story with the class, one that many of you may be familiar with, one you may have forgotten, or possibly for those of you young enough, this might be the first time you ever hear it. The story that she shared was of a girl by the name of Rachel Scott. 17-year-old girl in the Columbine High School in the United States. And she had been a devout follower, committed Christian, but she was tragically shot. Killed at school, along with 12 others. Many more were hurt. Now, it was reported that Rachel, being a devout and steadfast believer, it was reported that the shooter repeatedly asked her before shooting her if she believed in Jesus. And being a committed follower, she honestly said yes. She affirmed her belief. And the result was that she was the first one to be shot in that horrible, horrible incident. Now, for me, this was the first time I'd heard that. I didn't watch the news. Internet wasn't as easily accessible at the time, and I hadn't heard it. And it had a huge impact on me. And it raised a question for me then and there that I still ask myself to this day. And that question is, how much is enough? How would I respond in that situation? What is the cost of being a disciple of Jesus? Or, these are all in the same vein, am I giving him everything that I can? Again, how much is enough? How much is God asking of me? Now, you may be able to relate to that situation, that question that I'm asking. Maybe for the same reason, maybe for different reasons. Perhaps you have found your faith challenged by a difficult situation, loss of a loved one, difficult financial situations, conflict in relationships, abuse, but a difficult situation nonetheless, and you find yourself asking that question. Maybe you found a particular teaching of the Christian faith difficult, or maybe you're just new to the faith and you're trying to figure all of this God stuff out. But you find yourself asking the same question. How much is enough? How much is God asking of me? Maybe you've been a Christian for years. You've come to church, listened to the preaching, you read the Bible, you pray, you serve on a team, but you feel like there's more. Maybe you feel deep down, you know that God is asking more of you, but it scares you too much to ask the question. Or perhaps you are doing as much as you can, but you are still unsure if it is enough. It could be that you have never thought about this before, that has never even been mentioned to you, that you don't really have time for it anyway. Or you may have heard somewhere, a different church, or at a conference or online, that God doesn't expect anything of you, that he loves you the way you are, that if you just accept his love, he will give you your best life now. Ferraris, parties, champagne. You're going to be rich, successful, healthy, and all your desires will come true. It is even possible that you've already resolved all of this, that you know what God is asking of you. But then, even then, the question should still remain, how much is enough? What is God asking of me? Well, the good news for me and for you is that this question has been answered. In fact, God thought it was so important, Jesus answered it directly without being prompted. And we can find one of the times he answered the question in our passage today. So if you would like to turn with me to Luke 14:25-33, if you haven't already. Now, just to set the scene, Jesus, at this point, he's about in the middle of his journey to Jerusalem, where he knows he's going to be betrayed, he's going to be crucified, he's going to die. And he's in the middle of that journey. And directly, just prior to this, Jesus has been with the Pharisees, and we all know that they were Jesus' favourite people. And he was having dinner with them, and he was setting them straight on a couple of topics. And we all know that he had to do that on a regular basis. And he challenged them on their concept of the Sabbath. And if you could heal someone on the Sabbath. And he taught them about being humble and not assuming a place of honour with the parable of the wedding feast. He then taught them about being generous, particularly to those in need. And further, he taught them about the coming kingdom and how many who were already invited by God would miss it, preoccupied with things of this world, preoccupied with work, preoccupied with getting married, preoccupied with all kinds of worldly things. And instead, because they wouldn't come, God would extend the invitation to those who seem the least likely in an earthly sense to sit at his banquet table. And then this leads us into our passage for today. Now, Jesus is no longer dining with the Pharisees, but traveling, and that's important in this passage. He is traveling again to Jerusalem, and he is, as we read, accompanied by great crowds. If you would like to read with me, verse 25. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said. Okay, so as I've mentioned, we need to remember Jesus is in the middle of his journey to Jerusalem. And we need to remember that time and time again, these large crowds that would show up around Jesus represent a pool of potential disciples. The large crowd are significant because they represent that potential pool of disciples. The journey is significant. It's a motif we see again and again, particularly in Luke, in the attraction and formation of disciples. So the journey itself is actually part of the process of discipleship. The journey itself is part of the attraction and the formation of discipleship. Now they follow, the crowd is following, they follow because they recognise, and rightly so, something rare and special about Jesus. And they tag along to satisfy their curiosity and hoping to see something quite spectacular. And also, as we know, most will not fully grasp the implications of what it means to be with Jesus. There is a big difference between simply going along with Jesus and following him as a disciple. There's a big difference. It is not enough to say that they were there, that they heard his teaching, they saw his miracles, and they ate with him. No. As we see further down in the passage, more is required. Okay, so let's continue reading verse 26 and 27. If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Okay, we really need to put the brakes on right there. Did Jesus just say, you've got to help me out here, I might be reading this wrong. Did Jesus just say to be his disciple we have to hate? Isn't this the God of love? The God of grace and mercy? Did he say we have to hate our family and hate ourselves? That can't be right, surely. I mean, it's Jesus. Hate? Nah. Well, yes, in fact, you obviously all read it with me. That is what Jesus said. Hate your family and yourselves. That sounds pretty significant. Now, fortunately, we need to understand it in context. It's actually a Semitic phrase, which really means, in this context, it really means to be Jesus' disciple, he must come first. He must come before family, before ourselves, before work, before study, before success, before money, before whatever culture values, before material things, before our primary support network, whatever that may be. Jesus must be first. That's actually what it means. It doesn't mean you have to not get along with your parents. In fact, if we look at the rest of the Bible, we're trying to accomplish the exact opposite. So you don't have to hate in terms of the way we would use it, your family and yourself, but Jesus must be before your family and for yourself. And he's not saying don't love people at all. He's saying condition number one of being a disciple is that he must be loved above all things. He is master. I can't emphasize this enough. That our identity is not to be formed by the things of this world, but our relationship with him by character based on him. Okay, so we cleared up that hate thing, that's good. But verse 27, what's this whole take up your cross thing mean? What's that about? Now, first, and I hope nobody here can actually answer this question, but as far as I understand, it's nearly impossible to explain what a horrendously painful experience being crucified is. It is meant to be one of the most horrible ways to die. And on top of this, in the context of which Jesus was speaking in the ancient world, it was also seen as an incredibly shameful thing. So what does that mean when we read this? So it means Jesus is saying to be a follower of him, we need to die a painful and shameful death. This just doesn't quite seem to fit with the other teachings that we hear in the Bible, the things about love and care and compassion, patience and kindness. But again, the answer is yes, this is what Jesus said. Yes, this is what he means. And you're all intelligent people, you figure this out. It's a metaphor. And it's condition 2 for being a disciple of Christ. A disciple of Jesus must deny themselves. That's what it's saying. A disciple of Jesus must deny themselves, deny their self-will, and embrace God's will, no matter the cost. No matter the cost, a disciple of Jesus lets go of self-determination and replaces it with obedience to and dependence on the Messiah. Just like that young girl that I shared about this morning. Dependent, reliant, obedient to Jesus. Even, I made up a word, even to the point of dying. Now, another thing to clarify this as well, the significance of it, it's written in the present tense. By doing so, God is stressing that this is an ongoing quality of living. It's not, I do it once when I accept God. It's every day, every moment, every second, 24/7, every year, my entire life, ongoing, putting Christ first, dying to myself and choosing his will. All right. So we know that the ongoing journey is crucial for the formation of disciples, and that Jesus is to be number one priority, the master, the first love, that disciples are to give up self-will and have their identity and actions determined by God. And further, that many who follow will not get this. They will be followers, not disciples. But what else does Jesus have to say about how much is enough? So let's look at verse 28-32. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, "This person began to build and wasn't able to finish." Or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he is not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and will ask for terms of peace. Okay, so now Jesus has transitioned into two parables involving building and going to war, both of which warn against making a hasty decision to follow Jesus. Jesus is highlighting this point by putting the parables back to back. It's a Jewish thing. The repetition is used to highlight and emphasize. He's saying here, in these parables, if you want to be my disciple, it is important that you really consider this first. Building the tower, the parable that we see there, building the tower, talks about laying the foundations. This is actually connected to a very well-known parable about a man who built his house on the rock or the sand. Only a disciple who builds their foundation on the rock will have the resources needed to finish. And it's something that we need to consider, because our resources are not physical things, they're not worldly things that we have. Our actual resources for finishing our faith, for finishing being a disciple, is Christ. And that is the rock. And we need to take that into consideration when we start this. When we start as a disciple, when we continue as a disciple, am I willing to be fully committed to Christ? Am I willing to rely on him to finish the work? Because I can't do it myself. It's another important part of the tower parable here, the symbolism, the metaphor, is as Christians, we're in warfare. We're in spiritual warfare. And towers are used for positions of defense. So having a tower in which we can stand and be steadfast to resist the attacks of the enemy. It's important as well. As a disciple, we need to have a place of defense. And again, guess what the place of defense is? Christ. Standing on and in Christ is our place of defense. It's reinforcing the same idea. Christ, Jesus, Messiah, God. It's all about God. The other thing that we see, and we see it in both parables, the person who makes the decision but is not able to finish because they've used the wrong resources, they don't have enough resources, they end up in a position of shame. They end up having started the journey and not having finished, and everybody can see, and they know. And in the metaphor of the tower, it's actually a monument of shame because it's there and people can look at it and go, you couldn't finish. And now we all probably know someone in the faith like that as well, either personally or we've heard stories about someone who has started the journey and then filtered away, flitted off, gone. They haven't been able to finish. And it doesn't look good. It's embarrassing. And Jesus is trying to point that out here as well. And the same thing is true with the king going to war. Jesus is pointing out exactly the same things. He's just emphasizing it again. Going to war and getting it wrong. Don't have enough resources. Don't have enough men to beat the other guy. Lose. And in the case of war, it's probably even a little bit worse because the impact, the result of failure, of getting it wrong, it creates the public exhibition. Everybody knows you lost. But the result was usually execution, death. It's not great, most people don't want to die. Or being sold into slavery. Again, being a slave. Not many people willingly want to be a slave. Not good situations to be in. And Jesus is trying to show us the significance of going that path, of starting, having not fully considered the ramifications of it, and then not being willing or able to finish. So he's highlighting that, and even when he says sitting down to consider, he's highlighting the importance of actually considering your faith, thinking about it, thinking about why you would do it, and whether you can stay with him the whole way. So in these verses, Jesus is saying to be a disciple requires thorough fidelity to God's salvific aim, manifesting in our identity as a disciple of Jesus. Thorough fidelity. And the result of it is transformation. Transformation of our lives. We know that this is happening when our lives are being transformed, when we are changing. It can be external, it can be internal, it can be character, but it may manifest externally as well. Okay, all right, on to the last verse, verse 33. In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples. All right, so verse 33 is not a third condition. Jesus is concisely restating verses 25 to 32. He's giving an executive summary. He's saying that if you are to be my disciple, to follow me on this journey, you must bid farewell to everything else. You must abandon all other things before me. Put aside all other competing securities in order that your lives and identity may be remade according to the norms of the kingdom of heaven. And that's it. That summary, the entire passage is the answer. It is the point. Jesus demonstrated it, and he said it again and again in this verse and elsewhere through the Bible. The answer to the question, how much is enough? What is God asking of me? The answer is considered and committed with everything you have and all that you are. I'll say it again. The answer to how much is enough, how much am I called to do, is to be considered and committed with everything you have and all that you are. Everything. Jesus is asking everything to follow Christ, to be a disciple. All things, everything else, all other concerns have to be put aside. All other connections, relationships, priorities, needs, wants, all of them have to be put after Christ, even to the point of giving up things that make us comfortable, the things that we like, the things that the world and our culture tell us are good and right and noble. We have to put them after Christ, even to the expense of our identity. All of it is to be put aside as we single-mindedly follow Jesus. And as we follow Jesus, as we single-mindedly follow Jesus, he will transform us along the way, on the journey. He will claim more of us as the journey progresses. More of us will become committed to him. Strongholds, areas that we have a hard time releasing and letting go of control, Jesus will get them. But we need to be committed to following, considered and committed with everything we have and all that we are. So, you might be like, okay, well, that's pretty full on. Yeah, that's a pretty big ask. It's intense. It's a bit much. Or maybe it's difficult for you to hear. You may be sitting there actually trying to avoid hearing it or avoid thinking about it. You might be thinking to yourself, yeah, but things are different now. Or if I do that, then I won't be able to survive. Or you might be thinking, but I'll lose my friends. I could lose my job. I could lose everything. And that's too scary to even consider. You could be thinking that it doesn't apply to you because there are certain things going on in your life that you have to take care of first before you could do this. Maybe you think, hey, brilliant, I'm already doing this. Great, I can tune out. Perhaps you're thinking, what more? God wants more, but I'm already exhausted. I don't think I have more to give. Maybe you're thinking, wait a second. I'm only into this Christian stuff because I was told God would do stuff for me. But regardless of what you're thinking, regardless of whether you don't want to hear it, regardless of whether you feel like it could cost you too much, the truth remains. If you want to follow, if you want to be a disciple, you have to think about it. Really think about it. Because what it takes is considered and committed willingness to give everything you have and all that you are. It is complete and utter commitment, sacrificial commitment, single-minded devotion, even to the point of possible martyrdom. To the point of our identity not being ours, but being found in Him and Him alone, so that we are being transformed by Him to be like Him. That's what it takes. Considered and committed to giving everything that you have and all that you are. And so today, I challenge you that for the next week, I don't care if you think you've resolved this, are scared by it, never heard it before, or are unsure, regardless if you are 9, 19 or 90, if you've been a Christian for 5 seconds, 5 years or 50, I challenge you for the next week, make a decision. Count the cost and make a decision. Set aside 10 minutes every day. Reflect, ask yourself the questions. Am I willing to do this? Am I giving God all I have? And then at the end of the week, make the decision to be all in. Make the decision at the end of the week. Think about it, pray about it, and then make the decision. Be all in. Ask God at the end to guide you, to show you where you haven't given control of your life to God. Ask Him for the strength to do so. Ask Him to help you transform to become more like Him. Now, as the worship team comes, I want you, as the team comes, I want you to imagine this just for a second. Just picture this. Picture a church where everyone was sold out for God. Imagine a church where we all answer the question, how much is enough? Am I giving God everything with yes? Yes, we are absolutely giving God all that we can. Nothing is too much for God. Can you see that, church? Can you see a church so committed, so sold out, so unbelievably focused on God, so unbelievably focused on Jesus, a church where we allow ourselves to be shaped in his image, where we are being transformed to be more like him, a church not just growing in numbers, but growing in faith, growing in belief, growing in hope and love, a church that puts the community around us on notice, where people say, there is something going on at North Baldwin Baptist Church. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine the difference this would have in our homes, in our workplaces, in our schools and universities, where all the people can see instead of us is Jesus? Can you imagine that? Can you imagine the impact it would have if you were so committed to God that your family, your friends, your colleagues, the people around you just have to know, they have to know the answer. What is it about you that is so different? They have to know, and because of that, they come to know Jesus. Can you imagine a church being so committed, so reliant on Jesus? What kind of adventure that would be, what kind of miracles you would see.